Thanks for tuning in. This podcast is intended solely for the purpose of personal growth and not as a replacement for professional psychological support. The views and opinions of the hosts and guests of this show are not meant to be taken as medical advice. It is very important to seek the help of a qualified medical practitioner when making any shifts to psychiatric medication you may be taking, or if you are experiencing extreme psychological distress.
Welcome to The Drummer and the Great Mountain, a podcast where we share effective tips and practices for working with adult ADD, ADHD in a natural, effective way without the use of medications. Each episode, join me, your host, Bahman Sarram, along with the author of The Drummer and the Great Mountain, Michael Joseph Ferguson. Join Michael and myself in an interactive discussion of sharing our stories as we journey together in transforming what can be the gift of being what we call hunter types. This podcast is intended to be your audio companion to the book written by Michael, who joins me each episode where we both will strive to foster dialogue, give you our personal insights, and share both of our experiences on this similar path that we are all on. Our intention and hope is that along with the book, this podcast gives you an additional perspective as you listen to us delve deeper into each chapter of the book to give you even more tools to go along with what it is that you are reading. Visit us at drummerandthegreatmountain.com to purchase the book and look for more tools, tips, and updates, as well as giving us feedback on this podcast. Join our growing global community of creative types, entrepreneurs, and out-of-the-box thinkers on our shared journey. Welcome to The Drummer and the Great Mountain podcast. Are you feeling good? Are you feeling alive? Are you feeling inspired? If you are, you have Arthur Lee Land to thank, our guest today on the podcast. That was just a real short clip of one of his many, many, many amazing, absolutely beautiful composition. That one is an instrumental version of his song called Cracked Open. Arthur joined us on the podcast, which I'll take you to, the interview with Michael and myself. Going to play Cracked Open and another amazing song called Good Enough in full at the end of the podcast, like we always do. This time it'll be Arthur's music. Arthur is at arthurleeland.com. That's his main website. And another project of his, which will just blow your mind away, as if his original compositions, his music, already doesn't. He's also part of something else that he's created called the Art of Live Looping, and that's literally at artoflivelooping.com. All those links will be on our website. And now let me get into a little bit about why I wanted to just give you some words before I take you to this interview today. Arthur is a musician. It's what he does. It's who he is. He is an artist full-time. And he also happens to be a hunter type. So you can imagine how excited Michael and I were when he reached out to us. And what you'll hear today is 3 musicians, 300 types in the same room, which can be scary. But it was actually, all kidding aside, absolutely joyous. Michael and I are still kind of a little bit buzzing from being able to hook up with Arthur, who reached out to us. And for you to know how genuine it is when we say, as if you don't already, let us know how you're doing with The Drummer and the Great Mountain. Let us know what you think of the podcast. Let us know what you think of the book. Arthur reached out to us, and then Michael literally emailed me one day and said, look at this guy's music. Look at what this guy's doing with music in his life. And he's a hunter type that's working on the transformation process. We should talk to him. And I heard one of his songs, one of many of his songs, and immediately said, yes, there is no doubt he has to be on with us. Our conversation goes from learning about Arthur to his life in music and his life as a hunter type. There's a lot. He is such a genuine soul, such a caring individual. You know, he's also part of this organization called AbleChild. Please check it out. AbleChild will have information on our website so you can link to it and see. It's an amazing, amazing organization. It's a nonprofit organization helping parents of kids with children with ADD, ADHD. Arthur has like a song that the organization picked up, and now he's working with them. More details on that in the interview, called Good Enough. Let me tell you, if you're going to sit down and listen to Good Enough and watch the music video, we'll have the links to it on the website. Get ready to get pretty moved. I've watched the music video twice, and it has yet failed to move me full through. I've watched it twice. I actually can't stop once I start. It's such a beautiful song. The lyrics are amazing. It's about being a child with being diagnosed, labeled as ADHD, but a lot of other things about Arthur's life, which just all of it make up the man that is. And you know, once again, to tell you how genuine I am, that I am blown away by this man. I told him after our interview, he has a new fan. I'm going to follow him, follow his music, because it's people like this that, honestly, as a musician myself, that you hear, you're like, how is it I haven't heard of this guy? How is it possible? His talent is the size of the universe and beyond, and so is his heart, and so is his genuine juice, as Michael describes it, that he brings to the table. So that's a little bit about Arthur. Again, his websites are arthurleeland.com, and please check out artoflivelooping.com. And without any further hesitation, I'll stop my blabbering and take you to this amazing interview with musician, educator, hunter type on the transformational path that we were lucky enough to have on the Drummer and the Great Mountain podcast. Take you now to our conversation with Arthur Leeland. Enjoy. Well, it's been a while, my friends. It has been a while, but hunters sometimes have to go into the mountains and gather, and then we return. And so we do return here with you on another beautiful day here in Southern California. Welcome to the Drummer and the Great Mountain podcast, your audio guide to the book by Michael Joseph Ferguson by the same name, The Drummer and the Great Mountain. We had taken a couple weeks off, well needed for both of us, but we told you in the beginning of the year is we'll be doing some different things with this podcast, and it's sometimes good to step away. It's something we've talked about, Michael's talked about in the book, just to take a high-level look at things by stepping away. And that also enables us to get the juice, as Michael calls it, to bring you something special. So know that anytime we go away, there's something good on the other side. And that good is a gentleman by the name of Arthur Leeland. You heard some of his music already in the run-up to our interview today. And I can't tell you what a distinct pleasure it's been for Michael and myself to talk to another musician, but not only another musician, an amazing artist who also happens to be a hunter type. Last time we had Sarah Hutchinson on, who's more of a farmer type, but knows about helping us hunter types. Now today, we got 3 hunter types on the line, so honestly, who knows what's going to happen. Arthur, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and 3 hunters in the room is going to get fun. I know that.
Yeah, we'll have to follow the bouncing ball. I think for our audience, hearing the music is great, and we'll have all your links. By the time people hear this, they're hopefully on the website and looking at your links and looking at all the amazing stuff you do. But no better way to kind of get us into it. If you could just tell our audience just briefly about you and music and what makes you, or maybe when did you kind of come to the realization about music, art, and being a hunter type?
Well, I think that spans a longer time. I can say that when I was like 5 years old, I was putting round pillows on the couch with chopsticks and going, watching TV, watching Dick. Actually, now I'm going to really date myself. Watching Dick Clark Bandstand, right? So, anyway, so I was doing that whole thing, and then probably when I was in 3rd grade, I started playing drums, but my parents would never get me a full kit, so I just had like a hi-hat and a snare. And used to, wear those huge big Koss headphones and friggin' rock out to like James Taylor, Fire and Rain, heavy rocking out to James Taylor, or Buddy Miles, just all my sister's records and Beatles stuff, whatever. So then when I was 16, and and the thing is, I got kicked out of 1st grade. They told me, they were like, you go home for lunch, and then they were like, dude, stay home after lunch, just stay home. And so they didn't say dude, but anyway, so I got kicked out of 1st grade. I only stayed mostly in the mornings there at a public school, and then in 5th grade, that's when they called me hyperactive, and they didn't have words for ADHD back then, and they gave me Ritalin I was on Ritalin for a couple of years, and then in high school I started playing. I was sent away to a kind of a lame prep school in Maine. I was growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, and so I went there, and at the end of that thing, I ended up picking up a Strat in the basement of the one of the halls, and just somebody taught me like some of the chords, the Little Wing, and that was kind of it. From that point, I ended up coming back home, borrowing a guitar, because I'd been playing drums a little bit before that. And so the guitar was just, the thing. And then I was, early on in my first band, I was kind of like a Bob Weir clone, and into the Grateful Dead and the Allman Brothers, and Clapton and stuff, and loved the, that kind of, once I started soloing, blah, blah, blah. But then when I got into on the road with a country band, I got into the Telecaster, and that was like, and that's not really apparent on the record, this last record, but it is in this other project, Great American Taxi, that I'm in. And when I heard the sound of the Telecaster and the kind of country chicken picking thing, I freaked out and was like, how do I get that? And then fast forward to like my late 30s, I read Tom Hartman's book called ADD, A Different Perception, The Hunter and the Farmer's World book. Yeah. And that was the huge reframe, because I was like, oh my God, this doesn't go away. Yeah. And it's like, and of course, like he puts it in perspective of like, look at all these different people, a critic could go, oh, he's cherry picking all these great people that you can't, but it's like, you look at the Edisons and the Einsteins and the Benjamin Franklins, all these people that but you look at their track record in school and how they were and what their kind of modalities were that were documented. You'd be like, dude, that is the whole hunter thing. And it's interesting that I've also heard that the talented and gifted checklist is also the diagnosis checklist for ADHD and ADD.
Yeah.
That's it. Reframe.
Yeah. I hadn't actually heard that, but I guess hearing you say that, I wouldn't be surprised, because I think that's what you mentioned earlier. I think that's where back then, today, we mix these things up. I mean, Michael, I'll kind of pass the baton to you here, but that strikes me as very common back then when we were kids, and and probably now too, that kind of misunderstanding. That's a beautiful thing. He said, if you look at what it is to be an inspired free spirit, someone would also think you're ADHD.
Well, you know what? It occurred to me as you were saying that I gave a talk recently to a charter school, and one of the teachers came up to me after and said that all of the smartest students that he noticed had dialed in like a certain field that they were really interested in were all hunter types. He says they were all of them were like had challenges focusing, but they were into like, music and had all these different interests, and they were clearly gifted, but also clearly hunter types. So that this is the world we're talking about. So in terms of Arthur, so with your background, I mean, just to give the audience some perspective, I mean, how long have you been actively full-time professional musician, and like at what point did you realize you could make a living doing it?
Well, I think, I started obviously making money playing gigs in college, and right after high school. And then I went on the road with this country band. And that was like a full-time gig. And it was interesting because I was like, I had one of those, like, the write a letter to God type of, situation where you kind of surrender what you want, and you just write this letter, to the, the inner master, whatever you want to call God or spirit or your, guru or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's the point is you're releasing it and you're saying, Spirit, help me. This is what I want to do, and I don't know how to do it. So just, but this is what I want. This is what I think. This is that. So anyway, I did that, and the next day I found this ad for this like country band. I'm in the North Shore of Chicago growing up, and I see this band, and I was totally like, again, I was one of those like hippie kids that, what do you want to say, suburban upper middle class kids, and then a lot of what do you say during that time period? A lot of self-medicating for for consciousness, right? That you know. And then I quit everything at right before I turned 21. I quit everything for the spiritual path, and I was done with that. And so by the time I was at this point where I wrote this letter, I was like. Next day I found this article that said, hey, this is the country band, we're auditioning, blah, blah, blah. And so then I ended up being on the road with this it was totally cheesy, but it was awesome for me to make a living full time in a tour bus going on, wearing these going from a total hippie kid to wearing like rhinestone leisure suits, polyester leisure suits.
Gotta bring those back.
It was totally cheesy. But anyway, the point was, that's where I also heard Ray Flack on Highway 40 Blues, Ricky Skaggs' song, play the Telecaster, and I was like, holy crap, that is the most amazing sound, and I gotta make that happen. And so then that's where I went, and then so I made my living for years as a sideman, and I was in Southern California. I played with Jan Brown. I don't know if you know who she is. She was a country singer, kind of in the Emmylou Harris mode, and we used to play all over stuff. I was living in Laguna Beach. We got married in Laguna, my wife and I, Carol Lee.
Oh, wow.
Who happens to also be my lyricist and life partner and songwriting partner. And so, but that was, I got that back then. And then it was kind of like, as time goes on, as you guys talked about in your reframing your relationship with money, there's like, I didn't necessarily do it. So it was kind of like the typical thing was, okay, you're playing music or you got a day job, and you're like, when you got full-time music stuff happening, great, you're just doing that. And then other times you got to take a day job, until the full-time gig happens again, right? And so it's kind of that thing. But one of the things that I loved about what you guys talked about in the reframing chapter was the whole thing about that there is, you have lots of other gifts too. And I think when you think about it, pre-internet, there was much less option to really capitalize on those things because we weren't an information-based society with instant, wow, I can give this to people or sell this to people instantly, something that I know how to do. You know what I mean? Like
Sure. Yes.
teaching or coaching, whatever. So back then it was kind of like, gigs or day gigs. But that, I to answer your question in a long roundabout way, I figured out pretty early on that that's what I could do. And as a sideman, playing, country music and then doing my things. And I moved to Nashville and we've moved all over the place in different places where, I followed kind of the muse and my whole thing. But I was always making a living doing it, and then having to do a day job for a while, and then making a living doing it. I worked at a restaurant in Nashville. My wife Carolee and I worked at the Slice of Life, which was the new age health food restaurant in the 80s. Victor Wooten was selling muffins. He was selling muffins in front.
Wow.
I was hosting tables and then waiting. Carol was waiting tables and waiting on freaking everybody went there. It was like unless you were like old school steak and potatoes, like the Rodney Crowell's and Roseanne Cash and the Newgrass Revival, and just like and Clapton Comes to Town and James Taylor. That's everybody went there. And
I have to say, sorry to interrupt, but these kinds of things are not accident. I'm literally looking at the front of the book, The Music Lesson by Victor Wooten, because he's an absolute idol, and that's crazy that you guys kind of were in the same shop there doing that musician daytime till the nighttime thing kicks in.
What's even crazier about that is the time period that is in that book. I read the book.
Way.
It's absolutely the time period. It's so cool. And he did the first, and Carol was working the first Flecktones gig. He played every Thursday night, playing two basses, one on a stand on a table and then one strapped on his thing. And he would, fret the one on the table and then tap the other one, and then he'd sing. And so he did a solo gig every Thursday night. And then one night he had Bail at Fleck and Future Man, his brother, came in, and they did the first Flecktones gig, and it was just so out. Carol couldn't even keep her lists in her head together, and she finally was like, I can't play on Thursdays if the Flecktones are playing, because it's screwing with my my focus of lists and order, because it was so out.
Oh, they definitely are outside the box. I've loved them for years. Michael asked you and you gave us a great perspective for those artists listening out there. A lot of this is going to sound absolutely familiar. It's going to hit home. Now I want to continue that too and talk about, give us the perspective, because this is one of those things I feel like I know Michael and I have talked about offline, that we talk about it so much. This is one of those things we'd love to hear now, especially someone like us, a musician artist who happens to be a hunter type. Tell us let's put it in the box of being a musician, an artist. Tell us what you found to be the pluses and the minuses of this wiring. Again, that's how we describe it. We've been describing it here, and you're into the book, so this reframing of that it's just a wiring. Tell us Arthur's experience, the pluses and the minuses, and kind of what brought you to integrating this material of the book and getting into what we do here.
Well, I think probably the biggest, one of the biggest gifts anyway, is just the energy and focus towards being on the hunt. And the hunt can last 3 seconds, and it can last for hours and hours of hyper focus. When we're in this, for example, when you're in the studio, that's a really great example of just going deep and just being all about it. It's that's a really, and then obviously on the gigs and stuff like that. But so there's there's a hyper focus is a big deal. And then what else do I want to say? It's all these kind of traits of thinking outside the box, taking risks, scanning the environment, being sensitive. I think there's a book by another woman called The ADD Myth, and she talks about the 5 intensities. And I think and your friend Tina Harlow talks about the working with gifted kids who get labeled as ADHD, and they're actually super gifted. So, and they have these areas of intensity. And that intensity may be indifferent, physical, maybe emotional, maybe a certain. It's like there's or certain sensitivities. So those are all the pieces that make make it a super gift in certain areas that they excel in, which is the positive thing, and the drawback is sometimes the lack of of organizational skills, of time being, losing track of time because you're so into the moment, or you're on this hunt, and then if it's not, you have to be able to follow. I guess the joke I like to say is like it's a continuously repeating loop. Like I'm like in a conversation, and you think, oh, I'm going off on this tangent. I'm like, no, dude, it's just a loop. It's just we haven't got back to the downbeat yet. It's like, it'll come back, trust me. But so there's that piece, and I feel like the whole reframe. First of all, I mean, I feel like this whole hunter-farmer thing is a huge movement. It needs to be reframed worldwide for that piece, because the other piece that comes into that is like hunters are wired the way they are, and farmers are wired the way they are, and they need to work together. It's like I told Michael, we were talking the other day about the classic music artist versus the music business, the businessman, fight, the businessmen don't understand the artist, and the artists don't understand the business, blah, blah. That's kind of a typical hunter-farmer, thing. And my little joke that I've said for a while is like, a hunter can start the business, but don't have him run it, because they can't do the day-to-day, just like sit in the cubicle and do the same things. Yeah, they can't do that. But like, if they don't, they're the ones who like, let's get this thing going, and we got, and it's like the innovators and that whole thing. And then it's the same thing. The record business, the artists create the stuff, and then the record company has to like package it and do it. And then of course they want to go, well, we want another hit just like the other one. And the artist is like, no, I'm on to something else.
Well, I think that's also, and we all have different experiences on this path, but hearing you say that, I guess it shouldn't surprise me, and yet it does, because we all have friends. We've all struggled to make it, whatever your definition of making it in this crazy business and art that is being a musician. Point is that's why you see so many super talented, people you hear pick an instrument, the guitar, and you're like, what is this person doing on a Tuesday night at this open mic coffee shop? I don't understand. How is this person not like touring with Clapton? And I found when I dig into those kinds of stories of these artists, it's exactly that. It's because if you think about making your career music, that's your business. That's running a business. Well, ideally, you should be focused on your talent and making that better and writing the songs. But if you're trying to market yourself and get out there and being the gig booker and the contracts, that's where, because as we know, not all artists are necessarily hunter types, but for those that are, that's why a lot of them don't make it. Honestly, that's at least my point of view. I think kind of, Michael, we've talked about that before. Isn't that the same concept?
Yeah, I think and the other side of that though is the record company. The guy that started the record company was most likely a hunter type.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's the irony is that I see that same personality in entrepreneurs across the board too. And then once it kind of stabilizes, as you say, into the management, then it becomes a little more hard and structured, and then that plays out in our own day-to-day lives, with relationships and everything like that. So I just want to ask one other question, though, in terms of the pluses and minuses. So it sounds like you you kind of missed the addiction train because you jumped out early. What has been the challenges on that front, if you care to share about it? Because I think a lot of people who are listening or have challenges that they've been working on, and just to get your perspective on it.
Hold on, my 4-shot espresso is coming up. Hang on, I gotta go over again. This is part of our wiring, and this is why I feel like your work, taking it from where Tom Hartman took it, is so powerful because of the neuroscience and the piece of understanding how our wiring is, and the low dopamine thing, and the the attraction to stimulants, and which was what the whole, the whole thing was. They told me like in 5th grade, and this is like pre-Starbucks, of course. So they're like, well, you can take Ritalin, or you can drink coffee. And like back then, it was like Sanka and like Mrs. Folgers, and you're like, but now I'm sure if like you're like, oh, dude, I can go get a 4-shot espresso, bam, let's do it. So I think that the piece for me. So since and I was always, without getting into the details, I was always like, well, if 1 is good, 5 is way better.
There you go.
Oh, that's classic Hunter.
That is
Why
classic
not?
Hunter right there. There it is.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, it was like, and I was really seeking in my whole kind of younger days when I was medicating in terms of actually doing, the 70s and smoking pot and psychedelics and all that. That was all really about, is really about shifting the consciousness and wanting to get in the zone, and spiritual, kind of a spiritual intention. It wasn't about, getting wasted to be unconscious. It was more about wanting to get in this place. But then I realized it's like, you got to be able to do this naturally. This is not happening because the drawbacks are so intense and varied. So anyway, once I kind of found the spiritual path that I could focus on, then it was like I was done with all that. And so then the addiction shows up in other ways. Like, it didn't show up until, the coffee thing didn't show up until way later on, but certainly sugar and, eating various, it's like just because we get back to that whole thing. And I think this is going to be a really interesting part of the evolution of this science that we're talking about, is from a psychological perspective, is like, if you're constantly trying to fill that hole because you were told you're not good enough, or you're not doing it right, or you're, constantly being badgered by your farmer parent, like my dad wasn't a farmer. My dad was a total freaking ADD.
Sure. There's the genes come from somewhere.
Absolutely. And he was like, he was the top of his field, executive vice president of Encyclopedia Britannica, of sales. He basically figured out how to duplicate himself and sell millions of books, and it all rolled up to him. And it was like, he was like the greatest salesman. And that's a typical entrepreneurial hunter deal. He couldn't read well. He got his friends to help him read. Like the perfect example of his story was like, his mom gave him like a quarter to cut the lawn, and he went down the block and got the kid to do it for 5 cents. It's like, that's like that creative, entrepreneurial spirit. So my point was, having my mother as the farmer constantly badgering and just, trying to keep me in the box. Then that whole piece of how that shows up in your later life, which we talked about earlier, is that thing of like the self-criticism and the critic and blah, blah, blah. I think that's going to be a really interesting piece, because it's those pieces that you're trying to fill that void with whatever it is that you're using as your addiction, because you don't want to feel the pain around all that stuff too. So that's, another part of it.
I think it's interesting too. It's just part of our conversation. I have to add before I ask my next question, and I have so many. Arthur, you just might have to be on the show much more often. So I hope that's okay with your management. No, it's interesting what you said about. I guess you were in 5th grade, Ritalin, or and now today a 4-shot espresso. It's kind of ironic that I remember back then when all this stuff was happening and observations of kids and how they behave. It's so funny, like, you don't give caffeine to your child, do you? It's like, no, I would never give coffee to my 5th grade, but I would give, something else. So I find that interesting. With that in mind, we have your bio on the website. We're going to talk about it in the pre-run-up. But I really want people to know about, there's being a hunter type. You're on the path. You're on the transformational path. Wherever you are with it, it sounds like you're grooving with it and you're in a good place. But as we talked about, we all go back and forth. But the important part is that you're on the path. But let's go back to when we were all in whatever grade, 5th grade and 4th grade. Not only are you an amazing musician, not only are you an educator, not only do you do the art of live looping, there's this other thing you do, and it's with an organization called AbleChild. So if you could just briefly tell our audience, what is AbleChild? Like, what is it they do, and how did you get involved?
Well, I've been doing, when I started, because I always played in bands and stuff like that. And then when I started in the early, like in 2000, I guess, I started looping. Actually, somebody told me, a very wise person told me in the mid 90s, they were like, she was oh, you probably know her, Kim Robertson, the harp player. You guys probably know her. She's kind of in the new age movement. Anyway, she was like, I used to be a piano player, but I started playing harp because it was unique and nobody was doing it. She's like, try to find a way to be not just another guy with a guitar.
Yeah.
So
Good
to make a
advice.
living. And I was like, wow, that's brilliant. And it took me years, actually, at least 4 or 5 years to all of a sudden, come up with, I was playing these solo gigs along with my band gigs in Chicago and whatever. And I was like, man, I can't, because I'm as a single note lead player, when you do that kind of thing, not like the Michael Hedges, Bruce Coburn, where you're playing like all the melody and all the chords at the same time. I was like, a very single notey type of a lead player. I was like, man, it's really boring just playing solo by yourself. You can't solo over that, or when you do it just without any backing, it just doesn't really work that well. And so some guy at Guitar Center was like, dude, you should get a looper. And I'm like, what's a looper? And so anyway, the long story short is I started this kind of process of the art form of live looping. And I, of course, like the Julia Cameron Artist Way book, she says, art is messy and you gotta be, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but you gotta be willing to suck early on, because it's not that those kind of seedlings of creativity, if they get squashed, nothing ever happens. So you gotta be willing to suck. So I was playing these bar gigs where I could loop badly and do it and just like not have the pressure and still get paid. And so I started delving into this whole art of live looping art form. And so that became a huge passion. And as it, went from just a guitar to vocal to I went to West Africa and I brought back drums with me, and I was like, I should bring them in a gig. And so then all of a sudden I got that, and then I'm like, wow, I should bring a bass, the whole band sound from this whole kind of West African thing that I got it from over there, that I wanted to have all these multiple percussion parts and blah, blah, blah. So then it was like, I could add a guitar synth, and then, I got to bring my electric guitar for that. So I just kept continuing on this process of creating this whole like band sound. So, and that is like the ADD mind at work, the art of live looping. It's like little hunts all the time. But then to go forward to this thing, I started doing, I had a program in the 90s called Music for a Happy Heart and Healthy Planet. And it was like a program that I did in the schools, and I had like, DAT backing tracks and a slideshow that my friend did with him and stuff. And I had these super kind of uplifting songs and blah, blah, blah. But that's where I started doing this school educational outreach thing. And then after I had been looping for about 4 years and I moved to Colorado, I was like, man, I should do this looping thing. And because it's so, there's so many metaphors. Like Victor Wooten's book is so great for taking principles of music and then putting them into life principles. Like that's the whole gig of that book. So I was like the same thing with the art of live looping. There are all these principles, like, a musical life skill of listening can help you find your melody and rhythm in life and help create harmony. And harmony is just getting along with others, like just stuff like that. So I was like,
Yes.
I started doing that. And so then I was at talking to the others, and it's amazing when I do my school program, they always come up to me afterwards and they'll be like, because I'll get kids up and we'll loop up a song and we'll do found object for the younger kids, and for the older kids who actually can play, I'll get those kids up, and then we'll have a bunch of kids sing and blah, blah, blah. So we create a song on the fly. And, but they would be like, and I'd pick kids out of the audience, and they would always say, I can't believe you picked like like our classic ADHD kids. And I'm like, yeah, it's not and I just do it totally intuitively. It's we're like magnets to each other. So it's
I was
like,
going to
Exactly.
say, yeah, you're drawn to each other, I'm sure.
oh yeah, and so, but to get to to answer your question, so I did that, and one day I talked to this one of the administrators, and she's like, oh, you should check this guy out. and now I can't remember his name because he's done some really cool thing around the whole ADD thing, the reframing thing, and I'll find that. But I ended up reaching out to this guy, and then he was like, "Hey, have you heard about AbleChild? I saw that he was on their board. I don't know. So then I just reached out to these guys. Well, actually, I didn't even reach out at that point. I just went to their site, and they're basically AbleChild is parents and caregivers for a drug and label-free education, or label and drug-free education. So they basically support parents and caregivers of kids with ADD and ADHD to navigate those whole waters, and they tend to get a little more like they're fighting the bigger legislative battles too, but their website is filled with resources for the parents, and they were basically parents of kids who were total hunters, and they wanted to put them on Ritalin or whatever, and the parents were like, I think there's some other ways, and we're gonna try to do something different. And so with you got to have the championship of your parents. It's a big deal because it's a lot of pressure. So Anyway, that's how I found out, and I was like a big fan of them for years. And then when I came out with this record, my last record, Cracked Open, there was a song on it that I wrote called Good Enough, which most of the songs that we write and the CDs that we have out for Arthur Leland are songs that my lyricist and wife of 30 years, Carol Lee, writes all the lyrics. And there's a few songs on Dragonfly that I've written the lyrics to, and then only one song in this next record. And I used to write all the lyrics back in the day, but once we started writing together, we were like, oh, this is really good. She's super, super talented.
Nice.
And so it was a whole other thing of working together. And it brought in a lot of other pieces that I didn't do with my thing. So it was very exciting. But anyway, the point was that this song "Good Enough" it's literally my life story, and it actually touches on the whole just many aspects of this hunter journey, including dropping like a bomb around sexual abuse, which when I saw Oprah's show where she had 200 men on talking about sexual abuse and their experience, I watched that and was like, holy crap, I gotta go there because it's part of my history. And I did it in a way that's very, it's subtle, but I mean, it's a bomb. And so, but it's a part of the story. And so it was like, when I had that song out, I contacted, Sheila and Patty from AbleChild, and I was like, hey, I'd love to use this song to help raise awareness of what you guys are doing, and hopefully helps raise some donation and fundraising, blah blah blah. And so we used a widget and then kind of did that whole thing, and just that was my relationship with those guys. Is like I wanted, I was kind of the rah role model of that, the hunter type in creativity. And so I just love what they were doing. And then that's led me, and again, that was post reading the post reframe of the great reframe of ADD from Tom Hartman's book. And then that led me on to like finding you guys and finding other people who are doing that kind of, engaged in that conversation. But I think what you guys are doing is absolutely like, this is the top level of bringing this information out with all the updates in neuroscience, and then all the super awesome techniques. Like, for example, I love the whole thing about affirmations on your as pop-ups on your iPhone through Gmail and the Google Calendar. That is like, I just think now they sometimes annoy me because they come up all the time. I'm like,
but it's mind-blowingly simple, isn't it? Isn't it? Don't you find like, we're so transparent here. I don't have any reason to oh gosh, blow a wind up anyone's skirt, for terms of a better word. But that's what also I loved about Michael's book. It's these simple things that somehow as a hunter type we don't think of, but then when we do them, we're like, well, that's crazy how simple that is. But it's the override. I call it overriding the wiring. That's the way I think of it. Is some of these more simpler techniques, all you're trying to do is just shorten the wiring, short circuit it just for a little bit till you get on a good path where the wiring, is a benefit. So yeah, little simple things like those reminders. They help, and I think for everyone it's different. I mean, for me, the challenge with the reminder was actually doing it, and that was a 3-month initial struggle. And I realized how used to I was of not giving myself a chance. There's a, Michael and I think discussed before, there's a worthiness issue, and it may be, Arthur, with the very thing that you mentioned before. And you mentioned it good enough. I'm going to be going all over the place, but I have to mention this because we need to wrap up, but I don't want to wrap up without saying how amazing this song "Good Enough" is. For those in our audience, we'll put it on the link to the download on our site. This song is amazing. The lyrics are amazing. The Hunter type community will absolutely latch on to what Arthur's communicating with this song, not to speak about how beautiful the music is, but that's exactly it, isn't it? And I honestly came to this point accidentally, Michael. I mean, really, Good Enough is such a great way to summarize our discussion today, because that's what it is. Because we're told from then, oh, your free-spiritedness, your artisticness is this, not a wiring. There's something, as you said, quote-unquote, wrong with you. So how can we not have worthiness issues? And then I tie that into, there's first few days when the meditation reminder came up. I didn't do it, and I didn't do it. I mean, and it kept coming up. At least I was smart enough not to turn it off. I knew there was a reason for me to actually know the feeling of, hey, I'm being reminded of something that's going to help me. I'm being reminded of something that's going to make me better. Nah, I'm not good enough. Really, that's what it was. It took a few months to say I am, got up, did it, and then that's where the good habits build. So I just had to mention that, because all of what you mentioned just got me back to your amazing song, Good Enough. So did your wife and you collaborate on that? Did you, I'm curious about, from a musician standpoint, Arthur, did you tell her your feelings and she kind of put them into lyrics? How did you come up with the lyrics for that?
No, I wrote all those lyrics, and they actually came out of I was in Nashville for the Americana Music Conference, I think in 2009, and I was literally kind of doing a meditative spiritual exercise, and literally got the chorus, the melody and the chorus lyrics in this meditation, and then so recorded those, and then I came back home, and this is amazing. So this is like I was telling you about. I was living in Fairfield, and the amazing people of this town. It's Fairfield, Iowa, and it's like the home of the Transcendental Meditation Movement. And I was like, we called ourselves third demographic because we weren't meditators, and we weren't the townies, Iowa townies, but we lived there for years. And so I was at the coffee shop one day, and I was talking to this amazing guy, Rory Goff, who has a book called Wavicles. It's I forget exactly, Wavicle theory. I don't know. Anyway, he's like a healer guy and a pretty cutting edge author. So anyways, we're sitting there, and I was like, I got this headache, and he's like, oh well, this is maybe a little woo woo for some of the listeners, but not for some other ones. So, but anyway, he's like, oh, you want me to look, kind of do some energy work on you, like at the coffee shop? I'm like, sure. So he starts, and then he looks at me, and he's like, so have you kind of checked in with your, something happened at 5 or 6 years old, that some trauma that you need to deal with, or something, right around that time period. So so I have my whole life, literally from the time that I came home from the hospital to, my whole life basically on film. Like my dad did 16 millimeter film, and I would narrate this stuff when I was a kid, and he'd piece all the stuff together back before there was sound on film. You'd have to sound stripe it and then do it later. So anyway, I was like, oh, well, I'll just go back and watch the video of that time period. So, and literally, this is this, you guys know this. It's like the synchronicity thing, right? So I put in the tape that I think is right around 1966, 67, and I put in this thing, and literally, it's that part in the you got to watch the video of Good Enough, because we did this amazing video that has both this historical home movie stuff, and then this current of me watching it and dealing with it. It's a really amazing thing that this guy Siren, Xiren, did as a video. He's a Southern California guy. Anyway, so what happened was I literally went home, put the videotape in there, and that part where I'm talking about, I don't want people to see how stupid I am, and I'm on this little, these little what do you call those? They're like the little cars that go around like the ponies at the fair. And so
Oh yeah, the Ferris
and
wheel.
I
Or
put
not the Ferris wheel. The
merry-go-round.
yeah, it's kind of like a merry-go-round, but they're little cars, you know, they're like little race cars. And so, and I put my helmet on and I put these glasses on. And in the video, you don't, on the home video, you don't hear me say this on the music video, but on the home video, I literally went to this part and it said, you know, oh, I'm putting on my helmet and glasses because I don't want people to see how stupid I am. And I was like, like, holy crap. Where did that come from? You know, like, and that's the lyric of the song. I mean, it's literally like I went through this whole process of asking that question of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing.
And then just bring it around, you know, that's it. And so the wiring was set. You were not at an age where you could be conscious to say like, oh, wait a minute, what am I talking? Like it was just sort of, you were in the passenger seat, and then you came back around and just brought some consciousness back in and shifted it up. I mean, that's the work. That, you know, that the work is getting out of the passenger seat in your life. I mean, whoever you are and whatever journey we're on, hunter type or not, I mean, that's the journey of becoming conscious, is just recognizing the patterns that you habitually go through and just using that focus, the hyper focus, to then turn back around and start to unearth some of these things so that we don't have to be completely ruled by these patterns that most of the time we didn't set up.
Totally. And I think that's like I said, that's going to be a further part of psychological evolution around this piece with the hunter thing. But I think what you've done with the book is really tied in a very holistic viewpoint. And I got to say that the piece about diet and exercise, and especially exercise, is like, I said this the other day, it's like non-negotiable. It's like, if I don't do that, it's like I'm just whacked. And it's so important. So you've just brought in like all those pieces in a very organized, you know, a very farmer-like fashion, should I say? Fabulous. You were channeling the farmer situation.
You know what it is? I'll tell you what it is. It's when I'm like, my brain goes the same way, but for some reason, and I notice this in coaching too, like if I'm outside of it and I'm working with someone else, somehow I just turn into this other person. And so it really helps me in my own wiring to talk to someone else, to be outside of me. I mean, the best thing you could do is become a life coach, because it really helps you step outside of yourself and see all the same stuff you're looking at, you deal with yourself, but then you're like, oh, it's, you know, you're outside of it. That's why I like, you know, I wrote about in the book the co-coaching process, because it's so helpful. Because as we all have those same challenges, but when you're outside of it for a second, you're like, oh, you see it so clearly. But when you're inside of it, it's just like, what?
Well, I think that's why, you know, one of my utopian ideals for what we're doing here is, you know, you mentioned it a few times. It's amazing. I don't know, Arthur, what artist I've run into that hasn't at one point done the artist way. You know, the artist way turned into this thing where I think herself, the author, started setting up groups, but then these groups evolved on their own, where people were like, oh, the San Diego chapter and in this county of the artist way is meeting Tuesday nights. And people just started helping each other. It would be amazing it would take a hunter type who's got a little farmer in them to organize this, but wouldn't that be amazing if hunter types started getting together in this way, weekly basis, a monthly basis, you know, because I think you nailed it, Michael. I think I haven't run into one hunter type that, because I honestly thought I was the only one. My adage throughout my life was, well, you know, a friend would come, they've got an issue, I help them out with it, advice, just perspective. Oh gosh, you're so good at this. And it's like, yeah, I'm much better at giving advice than following it myself. Like, I'm really good at giving it, but look at my life and what a mess it. But I think then when you meet with other hunter types, it's that co-coaching thing. I think it's absolutely where the power is. I think when we run into each other and then just actually sit down and help each other out, it's all it is. It's like you said, you're turning into someone else. It's a perspective. It's putting a mirror up to see that you're also, you know, not alone.
I think it's part of this movement that I've been talking to you guys about of everything that we're talking about with the hunters thing, and I feel like I want to put it out there. Like, it'd be great for someone to come up with an acronym, a reframe acronym. Since there's an H in ADHD, that could be the hunter. So coming up with a new acronym for ADHD would be great, because I feel like this is the reframe. It's like the big message is about the reframe. And then that's gifts. This is a total gift situation. And then the dealing with all these pieces that we have to transform that piece so that we can deal in the farmer's world, because there is that element that has to be dealt with. And so I feel like that's, like in these groups, it's like I feel like there's something happening here that will also be like, you're like a centerpiece for this. And as this podcast grows, and as people will give you guys more feedback, they're going to come up with these ideas, and something's got to happen. And I just feel like it's already happening. And it's like you said, it's bigger than all of us, from our conversation the other day, Michael. So I think I just commend you guys so much for creating the container that we can now, channel some of the energy and tell some of the stories and support each other, because it is about supporting each other and recognizing that it's, we're not alone, for one.
Well, Arthur, I got to say, honest, full transparency, your dream, and I think is our dream, is this transformation, this recognition, everything you're talking about, but you're doing it. I mean, you're part of AbleChild. I mean, for those of you out there, go read about AbleChild. Go read about Arthur's work on his website with AbleChild. We can only do so much because we're each individual one being. We don't have yet each 10 arms like the gods of the Hindu religion to be able to do 10 things. I'd love that, but for right now, I got these 2 arms, got this one brain, and one of the things Michael and I have said to each other over and over is, from the day we started doing the podcast, there was nothing in it for us. There was nothing we wanted from it, but just to feel like we're making a difference. And that's how you spread that energy, to have these kinds of wishes we have for our fellow hunter types to come true. And you're doing it. You're doing it with AbleChild. So, don't discount what it is that you're doing already that's going to help that. So I guess, that's my viewpoint. We have to wrap up, but there's so much still to discuss. So I have no doubt, Michael, I think we're going to be having sit downs with Arthur, hopefully more often, for sure.
Yes, most definitely.
Arthur,
yeah, it's an honor, Arthur. Thanks so much for tuning in, coming on, and also just sharing what we're doing. You've really been a gift, and it's really refreshing to have someone that's just almost exactly on the same page, and it's so rare. And you just somehow heard the beep, the clarion call, and we all kind of just gathered. So I'm intending things grow as we're talking about here, and we build a movement, because I think that's, and we're in the midst of planning some online events coming up soon. So hopefully we can continue to build the community out.
Oh, totally. Well, I think, and we're not, we're not alone. There's just tons of us, and you guys are just providing a forum for this conversation, which is great. And I do want to say that I for this particular situation, I think the links will be in the body of the copy, but I'm offering free downloads of Good Enough, and also the title track Cracked Open, and information on my educational programs, and just what I'm up to. So, but that we really want to spread that word of just this conversation of the reframe of the hunter and the disorder as a gift. And so I'm so stoked to meet you guys and be on the show, and just the journey that is happening, because it's happening for sure.
You yourself, I'll say what Michael's already said. You yourself are the gift. You have shown up for us as more people continue to who want to be on this show and share their experiences in being a hunter type. Your music has been inspirational since we've met virtually. I'm now Arthur Leland fan. For those of you out there, we used to, when we were covering the chapters, Michael, have homework. I thought of a homework assignment, and it's so simple, and it's something you're going to really, truly enjoy doing. Please, since Arthur is being kind enough to give you a free download of Good Enough, which we'll give the link to on our site, as well as telling you about Arthur's work, not only his musical work, which expands a wide, beautiful artistic range, but his work with AbleChild. Go download this song, and maybe, I'm thinking in the morning, I could be wrong, this is my prescription, I'm not a doctor, but I'll play one on TV, but play this song with headphones on and listen to the music and listen to the lyrics, then go check out the video for yourself if you're a hunter type, or as we've spoken about before, if you think someone is a hunter type, go play this song and listen to the lyrics. And maybe that's how you can help someone, is say, listen to this song. It really does say it all for me as a hunter type. So it's a beautiful gift. Arthur, thank you so much for your time. We want to just remind you real quick, as we always do, that we are a small press. Help spread the word, as Arthur has. Arthur found the book, found the podcast. He's been a wonderful, wonderful friend in sharing what we do here, what we're trying to do here. Reviews are really helpful. Please get on social media, engage with us on Facebook. For the book, you can leave a review on a website such as Goodreads. For the podcast, iTunes, we would love to get more. We've already had some amazing reviews. Please bring them. You don't know how much inspiration even a few words and getting that star rating in there kind of means to Michael and I, and keeps the inspiration going. If you have ideas on getting the word out, getting this info to institutions, social workers, progressive psychologists, Michael does seminars all the time, so please let us know how we can grow the community, as we've been saying. Before I do our final wrap up, Michael, any closing thoughts on your part?
No, I think we covered having Arthur on's been great, and again, we get a perspective that neither one of us have, and so it's refreshing to get a completely different take. I mean, I feel like I learned a lot from just talking to Arthur. Exactly. And I would say the big thing, I think the big takeaway from this interview is that there's so many of us, and just putting the call out, and also sharing the material. Like I wrote it, like the very end of the book. If you read the book, I said, take this material, make it your own, share it, test it out. Don't take our word for it. Like, experiment, and also find your own way through it. Create your own systems based on what works for you. And intending peace and harmony and accomplishment for all the hunter type artists out there.
Thank you again to Arthur Leland, our guest today on the Drummer and the Great Mountain podcast. You can find us on drummerandthegreatmountain.com. We will be, throughout this podcast, definitely playing 2 of his songs, the ones available for download. We're going to be playing them in full, so if you're in the car, as some of you are, I know, listening to our podcast, you're going to get to enjoy 2 beautiful, beautiful songs, Cracked Open, and the hit single in my mind of what we do here, which is Good Enough. What a beautiful thing. Thank you to Arthur. Thank you, Michael, for your time. It's good to get back in the wagon. And my friends in the hunter community, remember, you are good enough. You are not alone. And please, as always we say on the podcast, take care of yourselves and your health. Be well. And friends, as promised, you're going to hear back-to-back 2 songs from Arthur Leland. First is Good Enough, the song tied to the organization AbleChild, an amazing original, very personal tune. And then following right that is the instrumental Cracked Open. Enjoy and take care.
Yesterday I watched the videos from when I was a boy. I have to say, well, it took me by surprise. I heard that little boy say, I don't want people to see how stupid I am. It made me wonder who told him all those lies. I carry this with me every day, and I want to let it go. 'Cause I know that I'm good enough. Wish that you could understand. could have been my big brother. I was just a pain in his ass. Maybe my mom, 'cause to her I could never do things right. My cheating dad went along with it to keep the peace in the house. Now I'm left with this burden as stage fright. I was a champion of nothing during my school career. Hyperactive, I was a guinea pig for the little white pills. Super bright, but it doesn't apply himself, is what my teacher said. They wrote me off, another kid lost to the social ills. Well, I've carried this with me long enough. It's time to let it go, 'cause I know that I'm good enough. Wish that you can understand the price that I have paid to be a man. I don't have to prove myself or justify my worth. What I am is only who I am. It's who I am. Only who I am. A part of me was stolen by my cousins when I was only 10. Threw me face down on the bed, I didn't know what was happening. These scars are like a magnet, they attract more and more shame. But I ain't gonna play the victim, I got no one to blame, no. These voices inside my head, well, they almost took me down. But I found the sound of silence, led me to forgiveness. I know that I'm good enough. Wish that you can understand the price that I have paid to be